Oh, we really about to ruffle some pastel-colored feathers with this one. But y'all know I didn't come here to make you comfortable. I came here to make you think. Because if Easter was really about Jesus rising from the dead, why is it based on moon cycles, fertility rituals, and spring symbols that were being celebrated thousands of years before Christianity even existed? Like, did Jesus really rise again? Or did the church just hit Control-C on pagan spring festivals and call it divine intervention? I think we all know the answer to that, but for those of you who don't, here's 10 everyday things you do that are rooted in witchcraft, Easter edition.
All right, let's hear her things that are rooted in pagan tradition, and I will go through and debunk all of them. Well, maybe not all of them, but most of them.
Number 1, the name Easter itself. So let's start with the name, because Easter doesn't come from anything in the Bible. It comes from Istra, or Ostara, who was the Germanic goddess of spring and fertility. An 8th century monk named Bede wrote that April was named after her and that pagan celebrations were held in her honor. Christianity didn't invent this. It just borrowed the timing and rebranded it.
So there are 3 things that are just fundamentally wrong with this argument. Number 1, Eostre is only mentioned in the 8th century from one source, which is Bede. And Easter, as we know it, started in the 2nd century. Something else that you are just assuming is that Eostra is where Easter is derived from, where most scholars would actually argue against you. Britannia.com says that the widespread consensus is that the word derives from Easter week, which is in Albus, the Latin phrase that means dawn. And in Old High German, that becomes Eostrum, and that is the precursor for the modern German and English term Easter. You're also not adding the fact that most Christians do not say the word Easter. They say something or a version of Pascha, which is a take on Passover.
Number 2, the Easter bunny. The Easter bunny comes from ancient pagan fertility symbolism, where hares were sacred to Istra and associated with the moon and fertility and rebirth. Their high reproductive energy made them symbols of new life, which early Christians thought fit nicely with their resurrection story.
Your second claim about Easter bunnies is even more wild than your first one, because scholars do not agree with you. The Easter bunny is a German folklore. It is essentially that children would make baskets in hopes that the Osterbunny, I think I'm pronouncing that right, would come and give them colorful eggs. It is first recorded in George Frank von Franchus, I'm not pronouncing that right at all, his De Obis Passibus, also not pronouncing that right, about Easter eggs in 1682, probably 1,000 years after paganism died out in Germany. And it is essentially just saying the German folk belief of an Easter hare laying eggs hidden in garden and bushes for children to find. And this belief that the goddess Eostre had, like the hare and rabbits associated with her, only came about in the late 1800s. In fact, the Oxford Dictionary of English Folklore would disagree with you. It says, nowadays, many writers claim that hares were sacred to the Anglo-Saxon goddess Eostre, but there is no shred of evidence for this. Bede, the only writer to mention Eostre, does not link her with any animal. In fact, they would go even further. A legend often encountered in contemporary times is that Eostre freed a frozen bird from a tree branch by turning it into a hare. It still continued to lay eggs, but having no use for them anymore, and in gratitude to the goddess, gave them away. This has no basis in any authentic pre-Christian folklore, myth, or religion, and only appears to date from 1883, first published by K.A. Oberle in a book in German and later quoted by H. Kurbs in a notes section in the journal Folklore. So this notion that the Easter bunny comes from Eostre is just not found anywhere in the academic world. I get where you're getting this from, but it's just not true.
Number 3, egg symbolism. Eggs have absolutely nothing to do with the crucifixion, but they've been used in rituals for thousands of years as symbols of creation and rebirth and cosmic potential. Ancient Persians, Egyptians, and Romans gifted eggs during the spring equinox to celebrate renewal, long before Christianity ever existed. Number 4.
Once again, I think you're displaying a simple just lack of Christian theology and just history in general. The egg was meant to symbolize Jesus' empty tomb because it had been broken over. Eggs also became associated with Easter because it was prohibited during Lent. So when the chickens were laying all these eggs, the English commoners, they would take them, they would boil them, and they would save them, and then they would break their fast after Lent, and they would eat these hard-boiled eggs during Easter. In fact, it was a common tradition for children to go out door to door asking for eggs before Lent. People handed them out as special treats for children to enjoy prior to Lent.
Dyeing eggs. The act of coloring eggs, especially red ones, predates Christianity and was used in fertility rites and protection spells. In Slavic and Mediterranean cultures, red eggs symbolize the life force. Some even say menstrual blood, which was a sacred symbol of creation in goddess traditions. Christians just added their spin, claiming red symbolized Jesus' blood. Number 5.
And I know you say that dyeing eggs have no connection to Christian, and you said that Orthodox churches say that it symbolizes the blood of Christ, but why are you assuming that only pagans have dyed their eggs? Eggs are very common, and I mean, come on.
Sunrise services. Modern Eastern sunrise services mirror ancient spring equinox observances. Across many pagan traditions, the rising sun symbolized victory of light over darkness, and equinox festivals marked the turning of the year toward life and growth. These celebrations were held at dawn to honor the literal and symbolic return of light, so the concept of resurrection was already baked into the seasonal cycle.
You say that we have early morning Easter services because of the spring equinox, but that's not true. We have it because the stories say that Christ was risen in the morning, and because morning, afternoon, and evening services were very common among 4th century Christians.
Number 6, feasting and abundance. Seasonal feasts during spring were a central feature of pagan and earth-based traditions. They celebrated the return of life to the land, fertility of the earth, and gratitude for survival through the winter. Food offerings were sometimes made to deities or ancestors. Christian traditions around Easter meals draw from this long-standing association between spring and abundance.
What? Feasting is a huge part in Jewish and early Christian culture. The whole point of Easter is to celebrate the death of Jesus. And you know what Jesus did right before he died? He did something called Passover, which is where you fast. I believe so. I'm not some scholar in Jewish history, but you fasted to reminisce on the Passover and the Jewish fleeing into the desert. And Lent, which is what you were talking about, Lent, which is the biggest fasting that Christians have, Catholic Christians, that happens because it is said that Jesus fasted for 40 days in the desert to resist temptation. And I feel like what you were talking about for the pagan symbols of abundance is just really weak. You didn't provide any evidence, and a lot of this stuff is something that most religions and theologies have.
Number 7, lamb imagery. The lamb has long symbolized purity, new life, and spring renewal in agricultural societies. Before being tied to Jesus as the Lamb of God, lambs were part of spring fertility rites and seasonal offerings in pre-Christian Europe and in the Near East. The Christian meaning was layered over these older traditions.
Wow, by far this one is the hardest to disprove, not because it's disprovable, but mainly just because there's really no concrete thing that says, no, this didn't happen, because most people don't even really talk about it. I feel like it's pretty obvious that Jesus being the Lamb of God, the sacrificial lamb, comes from, in the Torah, the Jews would sacrifice lambs to God. That is why Jesus is called the sacrificial lamb, because he was sacrificed. Pretty easy, theology and symbology, if that word's proper out there. Yeah, pagans definitely did sacrifice things, and they definitely did have lambs with this symbol, but they are both kind of independent from one another. The Jews did things separately.
Number 8, hot cross buns. These sticky little breads were originally mooncakes or seasonal breads marked with a solar cross, which represented the 4 quarters of the year or the phases of the moon. The Christian version just slapped a resurrection story on it and made it a Good Friday thing. The bun stayed, the meaning changed. Number 9.
Yeah, this one seems to be true. It seems that the Hauskrat buns seem to have ancient Egyptian and Greek historical evidence and proof, and then the Christians, changed it and shaped it. So, good job, this one's true. Now, I don't fully know if early Christians adopted it because of paganism. I do know that in the Middle Ages, bakers scored them with a cross because they thought that it warded off evil spirits and allowed the dough to rise.
Easter baskets. The tradition of using baskets during Easter has origins in pagan fertility rituals where offerings of food, flowers, and decorated eggs were placed in baskets and brought to altars or sacred spaces. These baskets symbolized abundance, gratitude, and blessings for the season ahead. Modern candy baskets are a commercial adaptation of this ancient practice.
Just because they're both baskets doesn't mean they're the same. An Easter basket contains the foods traditionally forbidden to consume during Lent, and then they are blessed by a priest breaking the Lenten fast. This continues to be normative in early Christianity, and Easter baskets are typically blessed before the midnight service on Holy Saturday. Now, the big evidence for Easter baskets being pagan comes from Eostre, because it's said that she's depicted carrying these baskets of food and eggs, except we've already gone over how Eostre has very limited evidence talking about her. The Easter basket comes from the 17th century, when German parents started telling their kids about the Osterhare delivering colored eggs to their baskets of well-behaved children, and children would leave small nests or baskets lined with grass to look like nests left outside for the Osterhare. And another theory is that the Easter basket comes from early medieval Catholic Church, where worshippers would bring baskets of food with them to the church to be blessed by the priest as the start of Lent.
And number 10, Jesus and the sun connection. The resurrection of Jesus is celebrated during the spring season, which is aligned with the vernal equinox and the full moon, not with any historical date. This is why it's never on the same day every year. This timing actually echoes pre-Christian solar myths, where the sun, S-U-N, dies at the winter solstice, remains still for 3 days, and then is reborn, bringing light back to the world. Many ancient deities actually follow this death-rebirth cycle as well: Osiris, Dionysus, Attis, and the story of Jesus fits the same seasonal framework. The symbolic overlap between the Son of God and the rising sun is not accidental or coincidental. It reflects continuity of mythic themes that predate Christianity by centuries. So to wrap it all up, it wasn't the Son of God who rose, it was the church's marketing team.
Now, this last one can't really be proven either way or the other, because, how are we supposed to know this? But I feel like your main talking point is just not that strong. You're saying that the reason why the resurrection happened in Easter is because pagans had spring being all about resurrection and new life and, new things budding. But the problem is, anyone can look at spring and say, hey, new things are growing. Resurrection, that doesn't have anything to do with pagans. It could be that early Christians looked at it and saw that the pagans were celebrating this way and celebrated that way. It could be that that's just when Jesus died. Probably not, probably maybe, who knows. Or it could be that the early Christians looked at spring and saw this new life and growth and development and decided to do it with that in accordance with the resurrection. The problem is, we can't know. There's really no definitive way, so sure, I'll give this one to you. I've already got 5 other ones as being factually incorrect. So to wrap things up, a lot of these developed independently outside of paganism. Some of these are just plain untrue, and some of these are a mix of pagan and Christian influences. I'm fine with that.